everybody out there in the training, learning, and development community. We've got another member showcase today. We have Theresa Francomacaro, who was actually on the broadcast, I guess it was a couple months ago now, or maybe a little over a month, right before the last community day. And I was telling Theresa earlier that when I was tracking how many downloads a lot of the recordings were getting that were related to the community day, Theresa was right there at the top. And so I'm really glad that the community has been checking out what Theresa has to say about why story works. I was so impressed with our last conversation. And so I'm excited to have you here and to talk about, to learn more about you and your journey in instructional design. I even have some questions about story that I'd like to, to throw at you and see if I can stump you. So,
okay.
Yeah, so we got about 30 minutes. I've got like 10 questions, and let's see what we can do here. Now, just tell me your journey into training and instructional design, learning and development. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I started out many moons ago in the nonprofits arts world doing social issues outreach theater as a vehicle to promote social change and healing. And like any good artist, I always had a side hustle, and that side hustle was always in sales. So I was selling things all the time. And I was working with a manager, and she went off to work for a Fortune 500 company. And she's like, T, you got to come on over here because you need to be a corporate trainer. I'm like, okay, I'll be a corporate trainer. So what I found was when I help people train, in other words, when I do train the trainer activities, I'm more like a director. And when I help people write the curriculum, I'm more like a playwright. And then when I deliver the curriculum, I'm more of an actress. So that background that I have, that master's degree in performance, really, really came into play and helped me a lot. And then over the years, I've just been in L&D and in sales and leadership and management. I'm also a certified Dale Carnegie instructor, as well as I have a certification in adult learning from the University of Washington. So when you pull all that together, it makes this learning and development journey kind of sing a little bit.
Right. It seems like it's really natural, right? Just moving from that. And I think that is probably the most common background that I see is in this space is people that might have some theater in their background, or something related to performance. I don't know if Danny or Jeanette that's in the audience right now, if they have that in their background at all, but it always seems like there's a little bit there that they like to talk in front of people, or at least like share themselves. So
and you got to be able to think on your feet, right? I mean, all of that theater, improv, and performance composition, and understanding how to read the audience, and that plays into the learner's journey, right? Because we know that when people are confused or we've got different learning styles, you got to change it up. And sometimes if you get somebody who's really not getting your message, you've got to throw in a story that's going to move them along so that they can see the value in what it is you're trying to teach.
Wow. So specific to story. I mean, what kind of led you to wanting to focus on story as the primary training tool?
Yeah. Well, it really just naturally evolved. About 4.5 years ago, I left a Fortune 500 company where I had been for about 4.5 years. And before that, I was with another Fortune 500 company for about 6.5 years. And then before that, so having all of these reorgs happen and then saying, if I'm going to take my football and play on another field, what is it that I'm really good at? In other words, what's the secret sauce that I bring to the table? And out of everything, it has always been around story. And so it really just got me going. And of course, I've read some books that I just love along the way. But my main impetus was, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what I've always been interested in doing is understanding and learning and hearing people's stories. And if you could just understand a little bit about story structure, or what we call the aperture, I like to think of it like if you've got a skeleton, you got the bones. So the bones of story are pretty clear, and they've been around for thousands of years. We're all natural born storytellers. I think we just forget.
Yeah. So how about as a writer or as a playwright? Was the stuff that you came up with, was it educational in any way, or?
Well, it's funny because I was my senior year of undergraduate work at Towson State University, and I was a theater major. And you had to do a senior thesis, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna write a play because I really like plays. So I wrote this play called Family Masks about, again, family systems theory, but really taking a look at the vehicle of change or social change, and we look at the six dynamics inside, six basic roles inside a dysfunctional family. And I was acting with a movement theater company at the time, and the producers are like, "We love this. Do you want to workshop this and we'll produce it?" I'm like, "Yeah." So my first play ran for 5 years, and I was just like blown away. People were like, "Oh my god!" And it was really one of those moments where sitting in the audience as a playwright or an authoress, people don't know who you are. And I remember going through the audience and just sitting there and listening, and people were like, it's like she had a tape recorder in my living room, and that was my life. And, I hear people say, I saw this most amazing play last night. And we had people coming to see that play that had never been to a play before. So that really just kind of got me going on this journey that's maybe a little different from traditional acting. So I started writing my own plays, and then one woman shows, and, always being in sales. So this evolution of writing and sales, because especially in, let's say, a retail environment, which is where I began my journey in sales, you've got a brand new audience, every time somebody walks through that door, crosses that threshold, and you've only got about 90 seconds to capture their attention. So it was really fun to kind of put into place some of those ways to build rapport and get people to open up and have a conversation with a total stranger. And that's storytelling.
Wow. Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And like Jeanette saying, that is an awesome perspective and connection to performing. I am a transitioning teacher, and yes, teachers are performers. And I know
Yes.
for myself, like my favorite teachers, like I had a history teacher in high school who,
Mm-hmm.
like, I couldn't wait to get to class
Yeah.
because it felt like he was just going to get up there and tell like another incredible story about, something in history. And it always just stuck with me, impacted me a great deal. And will definitely, I just so memorable.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that's kind of why you find that story is so effective.
Well, and again, having been, I mean, I'm always reminded, and I think I may have shared this with you on an original podcast, of the very first time I got the bug to be a storyteller was when I was 6 years old, being the narrator of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And I was chosen because I had the biggest mouth. And, it was this moment of like, oh my gosh, if you can move the story forward and you can help other people tell their story, it can transform people. And just this past weekend, I was on the East Coast, went to a wedding, the very first time I've been out of the state of Washington in a year and a half. And, I saw cousins I hadn't seen in ages, and they're like, what are you doing? And how are you? And, just hearing about people and listening to them. And that's what people remember. They might forget all of that great content, and they're not going to remember the story you told them. Or they will remember how you help them tell their story, because it's that feeling you get. It's that emotion you get.
Wow. So when you were 6 years old, was it in front of an audience that you were
Yeah.
narrating? Or,
Yeah, yeah, there were about 700 people in the audience, and I was the narrator of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And our lead puppet, because it was a puppet show, she was taking everybody back into the living room when we had to go upstairs to find Goldilocks. And everybody knows if you don't get upstairs to find Goldilocks, the story doesn't move forward. And so I stopped the show in the middle of everything, and I'm like, excuse me, she meant to say. And everybody starts laughing, and I'm just like, what is happening? And that ability to kind of see a story that's maybe going down the wrong track, or, think about us in L&D, right? We might have designed this great module, and we think, oh, this thing is going to be the best thing since sliced bread. They're going to love this thing. And you get in there, and the audience is like, oh no, we're not having any of this. This is not helping me. So then you got to shift gears, right? You got to find another avenue to go to get your message across. And you have to be able to change on a dime and have your stories in a catalog, or have that muscle memory of being able to shift on a dime, or present on a dime, or shift course with a different story, so that you can get that audience coming along with you on the ride.
Right. Okay. So you're a business storyteller and you're an executive coach. What's
Mm-hmm.
that like? Like using story to train executives. Like, can you tell us about that experience a little bit? I mean, is there particular challenges that you have being an executive coach?
Well, sometimes, and I say this with all due respect to all my clients out there. Sometimes our CEOs or my CMOs or people that are really high up there in the food chain of the org chart don't really realize that they could be a better storyteller.
Hmm.
So really helping them see what is the message that you want? What is the feeling you want? What is it that you want the end user, let's say if you're at an all hands meeting, to think, feel, and or do differently? If you could wave a magic wand and have just one outcome, what would it be? And sometimes really smart, high level execs have a hard time distilling it down to just one thing. And they have so many things coming at them, or then they get too general, right? So you got to get specific enough. I like to say specific is terrific. And you don't want to be too specific that the audience is like, where is this thing going? And they're just like checked out because you bore them to tears.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm really curious, just sort of that specificity. Is there something like that you can tell us about that? Like, say it was an all hands meeting, and and the C-level executive was just all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Well,
where have you taken that?
well, the C-level execs need to be able to be flexible in the moment. There's a YouTube video. I can't remember which one it was, but I think it was a Google exec. I don't want to call this person out. It wasn't my client, but they had practiced and practiced and practiced their story, and they had a tech run. And he had his cards and he had everything, and they flipped on the deck or their PowerPoint, and the technology wasn't working, and he was like freaked out. He couldn't move forward. He was like a deer in the headlights. And so I tell people, you really want to know your story, but it can't be so scripted that it's stilted. In fact, I was just doing a coaching session just before I left for the East Coast with a client for the Seattle Angel Conference. And he has to pitch to investors. And he's doing a 1-minute pitch. And he's really high up there. Like he just finished the very last Angel Conference in May of just this past year, and he was a finalist. He got through all the way to the end. He was the last of 6 people, so he had a really strong pitch. And in just about an hour or so, we were able to really make that pitch really dynamic and get him less of a scripted mindset and more of a story, so that he could go from milestone to milestone or just hit the high points while still being really engaging. And that's
Right.
the key.
Nice. And it has to have kind of that, the story, a lot of it is about having that emotional connection, right?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. In fact, part of what I train people all the time, and again, I think I spoke about this in my previous episode with you. So for those of you who've heard it, stay tuned. And repetition is good. It helps the brain remember, because as we know, we can forget up to 80% of what we learn. That's the Ebbinghaus curve, within about a day of training. So one of the things I teach the executives, and sometimes they have a hard time understanding, is this idea about emotion. And so I say, if you don't want your audience to flee, so flee, FLLEA, you need to activate one of the 5 neurochemicals inherent in any good story. And so if you think about that, there are 5 basic emotions inherent in any good story: fear, love, longing, empathy, and action. So if you know your audience is really kind of very much afraid, or they can't focus, you need to calm down and kind of reduce the cortisol levels. Or if you know your audience is feeling lonely and they want some love, you want to increase those dopamine levels. Or if you know your audience is really, really stressed, they need to calm down. They need to have a sense of longing to release that serotonin. Or, the other one is the oxytocin, which is the best. They call that the mirroring or the neurocoupling hormone, if you can release that, oh my God, she gets me, that mirroring with oxytocin. And then finally is adrenaline. So getting that spark, that call to action with a release of adrenaline is really going to spur the audience on. So that's what I tell the execs. I'm like, what emotion are you driving at? Is it fear, love, longing, empathy, or action? And a lot of times it's a combination of a lot of those.
Mhm.
And as storytellers, the more of those emotions we can activate in one story, or as L&D professionals, the more of those 5 emotions we can weave into our instructional design, the more we have of getting it to land and to stick. Because when it sticks, it's remembered, and the neurochemicals of our brain are sitting there in the amygdala, and the amygdala says, pay attention, this is really important stuff. So we want to activate as many areas of the brain as possible. And when the amygdala is activated, it's in that record mode. And that's because the brain is paying attention and it's firing on all cylinders. And in order to do that, we need to activate emotion.
Wow, that is so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm
Thank
definitely
you.
gonna have to clip that one and just and watch it again. Really, really good stuff. I mean, just because I used to like to consider myself a writer, and then I became a songwriter, and it's the same type of thing where I like to build stories into songs, but that acronym is gonna stick with me for a while.
There you
So
go. Well, we know this, right? As L&D folks, we got to have mnemonics, because John Medina says in that wonderful book I love, Brain Rules, the brain does not pay attention to boring things. So, if you want your audience to pay attention, you've got to get them to sit up tall and activate that amygdala. And the way you do that is to be interesting. And the interest comes in the stories. So the story is kind of the vehicle to transport all this great information you have.
Mhm. Awesome. So let me ask you a little bit about why Storyworks, your business.
Yeah.
What kind of projects are you working on right now?
Well, like I said, I'm working right now with the Seattle Angel Conference, and they have a series of workshops that go on Tuesdays and Thursdays through Lean Startup Seattle. So if there are any investors out there that are looking to get some investments from angel investors, it's a wonderful series, and I'm helping them with some storytelling on how to do a 1-minute pitch and how to do a 3-minute pitch and even a 5 or a 10-minute pitch. So I'm creating some videos for them, and I have a training I'll be doing with them on July 8th. I've
Wow.
also and I've got some other things in the works. I've got, some one-on-one coaching clients. Like I've got a client later this afternoon that I'll be doing. She has purchased my Kickstarter story program. So we're giving her 10 story sessions, one-on-one with yours truly, as well as 2 hours of story writing to use however she wants. So she just got into a brand new position. So she wants to use this ability to tell a well-crafted story in about 2 minutes or less, so that she can build rapport and get to know people, and people can get to know her, and eventually she can get promoted.
Wow. So is that a personal story that she's trying to develop?
Well, she's developing, I like to tell people you need to have stories in all 5 of those buckets: fear, love, longing, empathy, and action, like a catalog that you can pull out whenever you need to. So one of her pieces of intentional preparation for this week, and we'll see how well she did, because we're meeting it, like I said, in about an hour, was to tell us a personal story to a CEO that she had to meet, so her skip level manager, and use it as a way to embrace what he had said in a previous meeting about a call to action, getting people fired up. And so she's going to use an empathy story. And so I'm curious to see how it goes for her. So she's going to sprinkle a little bit of her personality in there, and then she's going to circle back to what that CMO was talking about, which is, we got this. We're on the cusp of some great change. And so she's going to utilize that as a way to show that she gets what his message is. She's behind him 100%, and empathy is a powerful motivator.
Wow. It just seems like that's so smart to go to somebody like you to be able to build this out. Such an incredible idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as a trainer, like, what is your
Yeah.
favorite part about that job that this career that you've chosen is in learning and development?
Well, it's never boring, that's for sure. And it's always changing. and you can see transformation. So, I'm a creative person, I guess you'd say. And so I was never really interested in things that were boring, I guess. So there's always something happening. When I was traveling a lot before pandemic and before COVID, there was always a new city or a new town, or, if I'm training someone else's content, it's very interesting to see how I can bring some of my personality to it while still staying true to their message. So I'm sure some of the teachers in the room can understand, if you got to do Common Core, or you've got to make sure these young people understand the metrics, or they pass the test, you want to have an interesting way to have them take that information in. So, that's one thing. And then really just seeing people excel and people say, oh my God, this helped me so much. Thank you. So that's really exciting.
Are you still writing screenplays or acting or doing anything like that?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm writing screenplays. I'm working on a book. I'm not very far along, but I've got a lot of ideas. I do a lot of notes in my on my phone. And the name of the book is I think it's going to be, excuse me, she meant to say how storytelling can help flip the script. So what I'm working on with this book is taking some of the main elements of storytelling and putting them together so people can understand that there are 5 key neurological responses inherent in any good story. There are only 6 main story arcs to any good story, and there are 7 basic characters in any good story. So if you understand that story structure, then you can weave in what story you want to tell. So my goal in the book is to show people those numbers like 5, 6, 7, and then say, okay, now it's your turn, and put in some of my own stories along the way.
Well, nice. Yeah. Theresa, get that book written.
Yes, indeed. I have a creativity cohort that I work with once a week, and they say the same thing. So I'm also doing some videos on my website, www.whystoryworks.com. And I try to drop those, once a week if I'm really disciplined. And sometimes they're not as once a week as they should be. So I'm going to be transparent. It's not always easy to get the story out there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to ask you that question too. Do you ever get tired of stories? I mean, is it something that sometimes you're like, okay, I've had enough?
Well, that's a really interesting topic that you bring up, because sometimes we've all got stories, right? And sometimes we've got some stories that just need to go. In other words, I've been telling the same old tired story for a long time. I got to change it up. I remember watching one of my colleagues. We were going through a recertification every 3 years. I got to get recertified with one of these modules that I train. And he's a brilliant, brilliant storyteller and a great trainer. And I've shadowed him. He was my mentor for a while. And I remember, like, gosh, I've heard this story like a million times from this person. And I'm like, why is he telling a story about an election that happened 20 years ago? So I think as trainers, we get comfortable because we know this story works. So I pull this one out. Oh, I know this one, this one is going to hit the mark in 2 minutes. I got it. So we have to know when to quote Kenny Rogers, when to hold him and when to fold him. You know what I'm saying? You got to be able to let some of that go, or take it. It's kind of like an accessory. Let's use the analogy of when you go into your closet. And I hear people all the time, they say, nothing in my closet fits me anymore. I have my vaccine baby. In other words, they say people can gain between 1 and 2 pounds during the pandemic. So if you count that up, that could be like 30 pounds or something, right? And so none of their clothes fit. And so the same idea, so they got to go get new clothes. Well, it's the same idea with a story. Sometimes the story doesn't fit anymore and you got to update it. And maybe you don't toss it out, but you just put a new belt on it or a new ending. You change it just enough to make it fresh, and you don't toss it. Or you shorten it, right? Or you think about the audience. So I've got, a lot of themes on stories, but sometimes I'll tell the same story, but I'll just change the ending, or I'll change the beginning so that it resonates with the message I'm trying to get across.
Right. And it probably helps with delivery too, right? If you keep telling the same thing over and over again, your delivery probably starts to get stale.
Oh, yes. In fact, I have one of my videos, and I think I may have shared this on one of the previous episodes with you. I say, in order to avoid death by story, or, we've all been there, death by PowerPoint, you have to be real, be relevant, and be brief. So you've got to be real. And that realness is the authenticity piece. And sometimes people think, well, you're just winging it. It's like off the cuff. And I'm like, yeah, I practice it so much that it seems like it's off the cuff, and there's nothing off the cuff about it. It's an intentional practice, an intentional preparation. You see, I'm kind of lifting my arms up like I'm lifting weights. You got to practice.
Yeah, totally. Is there, so, you've been a trainer for quite a few years. Is there anything that, that now that you wish you had known when you started?
Don't sweat the small stuff. So, quick story, because I love stories. This was years ago. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and I had to go to, again, another certification for some module, and I wasn't feeling well. I was sick as a dog. I really had no business going. I should have stayed home, and I went anyway. So I'm not at my best, and I was irritated, and so I went out to lunch with a colleague, and the waitress was really ignoring me and was not being very nice to me. So I felt, and so I'm like, well, I'm not going to tip this person. And because, she forgot my silverware, she forgot my order, she didn't give me water, she didn't want to do separate checks. It was a pain. And so my colleague that I was sitting with took that and went to my boss. And before I left to come home, my boss pulled me and she goes, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" And so my colleague pretty much threw me under the bus because she said I wasn't professional and I was irritated. And so I was like, oh, I'm so mad at her. But I was like, I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. And so I made amends. I, said to my supervisor I wasn't feeling well. And I made sure that I because that relationship was super, super important to me. And the person who threw me under the bus at the lunch table, don't sweat the small stuff. It doesn't matter. So, don't sweat the small stuff. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Fantastic advice. Okay. Last question. If there's one thing that people should know about you, what is it?
Your story is your only true differentiator. And what I mean by that is so many times people are like, well, I don't have a story. I don't have anything interesting to say. In fact, I was talking to a girlfriend just last night, and she's like, oh, I can't remember my stories. I'm like, oh, yes, you can. So when you get really specific in what your story is, because there are no new stories, there are just new storytellers. So you've got to have that secret sauce, or that je ne sais quoi, or that KPD, key point of difference, that lets you stand out. Because again, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. That's what Simon Sinek says in his book, Know Your Why. And, he's got lots of books, the Infinite Team, I think it is. But, that differentiator is scary. And to really be honest with people about that differentiator and your story sometimes can be hard. I'm always reminded of Brene Brown when she talks about this courage, and she says, who do you want in the arena with you? When she talks about daring greatly. And when I think about the people I want in my arena, or the people I want in the foxhole with me, it's people like my business partner, Erna of Why Story Works. She is amazing. She does what I can't do. Like, she makes everything on Why Story Works look beautiful. I mean, she's a great editor. So, and she's different from me, and that's the way it needs to be. And she's not so different that we don't have common values. So your story is your differentiator, and don't be afraid of it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Theresa. That's wonderful. Really enjoy talking to you every time that, you've only come up, this is only the second time we've talked, but I feel like we've done series. But if you ever need anything from the community, please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for helping support what we do. And I really,
my pleasure. I think there's so much to be said for the community that you're building here, Luis, because we need each other, and we need our stories now more than ever, because the stories are the things that connect us, and they remind us of who we are, and who we're meant to be. That's why story works.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. For me, it really is. I want to find how we our similarities more than our differences. Right. And
That's right.
I feel
That's
like
right.
our differences have just been accentuated so much over the last few years that I really want to be able to connect again. So
Yes. Yes. And there's enough for everybody, right?
right.
I mean, we don't need to be in competition with one another. We can support one another. There's enough for everybody. And so I'm here as a resource for you and TLDC whenever you need it. If anybody, has a story they're working on, or they're struggling with their story or their brand story, or they got a pitch coming up, just reach out to me. I'd love to help. You can find me on my website. You can email me. You can find me through TLDC on the Slack group there. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Theresa. And thanks for everybody in the live audience for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to pop into the chat. And Friday, we have Anna Smith from HubSpot is going to be joining us in another showcase. And with that, I wish you guys well until next time. Thanks again, Theresa.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.